Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we'll be discussing the US presidential election and asking where do the presidential candidates stand on Israel. Warm welcome to the programme, and I have two special guests, two very good friends of mine and regulars on the Middle East Report. They don't need any introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Robin Benson, great to see you, and Alistair Scott, welcome to the Middle East Report as we really unpack the US presidential election and ask what it means for Israel so that we can inform our viewers about what's at stake come the Tuesday, the 5th of November, when the American people go to the polls. I'll start off with you, Robin. You have a new article that's been published by Heart newspaper. Just share with us a little bit about what you've actually written and the significance of it, really talking about a potentially new war that Israel may have to face against Hezbollah in Lebanon and all that unfolds.
Well, I mean, as we are recording this program, the three of us actually don't know what the next days or even weeks holds, because of the ratcheting up of tensions on the Lebanese border between Israel and Hezbollah. But I mean, Hezbollah is a whole different kettle of fish in comparison to Hamas. It has more armaments. There have been recent leaks, I suppose is the right word, to indicate that they may even have electromagnetic pulse weapons supplied to them by Iran, but way more armaments than Hamas had when they started. Anywhere between 150,000 to 250,000 of all various types, but many of them are precision guided. So they can direct them at specific targets in Israel in a way that Hamas was not able to do. They have more fighters. Many of them have fought in Afghanistan, in other Islamic conflicts elsewhere, and they've come to help.
Including Syria as well.
Yeah, okay. So they have a better trained force. Hezbollah is effectively Lebanon's government. I'm sure the Lebanese government would argue the case that it's not, but it is. So it has control over all of Lebanon, potentially. There's a certain level of USA and French protection over Lebanon because of various agreements that have been brokered over the last few months. You have Iran's backing, obviously, on multiple levels, not just arms and finance, but many other ways as well. And we have the latest thing this week, as we're recording this, is that the president of Turkey has come out at least twice and threatened to invade Israel if Israel takes on Hezbollah and broadens the conflict. So there's just that in itself. But then as far as Israel is concerned, I mean, I've read several articles over the last week or so from what I would call reputable former senior members of the IDF who say that Israel is not ready to take on Hezbollah. It doesn't have the manpower. Israel has lost anywhere between 13.5 and 14,000 men to injury in Gaza. That hardly ever gets mentioned. I mean, the low figure of casualties, it's a bad thing, but it's a low figure. But those that are injured, it's massive, and that has depleted the IDF. It doesn't have the armaments, and I'm sure we'll get round to discussion that a little bit later on in the program, but it does not have the supply of armaments that it needs to take on Hezbollah, unless, God forbid, that Israel goes for the nuclear option, which no one wants to see. But if Israel is put into a corner, there's the real potential that they might feel that they don't have any other option to do so. Israel is tired. The IDF is tired after over 9 months of conflict. There's not been enough time for men to properly rest and be retrained and be prepared, no matter what these guys who come out and make these statements almost every week, oh, we're ready, we'll take on Hezbollah. There are many others who are saying that that's not the case, that that's just being fed to the Israeli public. And of course, the other factor is that there's significant international pressure that Israel does not do this. It doesn't broaden the conflict because of the potential to draw in Iran in particular. Yep. So it is a really major unknown situation as to how Israel is going to deal with Hezbollah, but it has to. It cannot allow this to go on in the way that it has.
Exactly. And the other aspect to bring into that one is that 82,000 Israelis have had to evacuate their homes from the north. They're not willing to go back until Israel deals with Hezbollah, fearing that they will experience their own October the 7th. Alistair, it's great to have you back on the Middle East Report, and thank you for the excellent work you do through Vision for Israel, known in the UK as Joseph Storehouse. Do you want to give us an update on the ministry's activity, particularly at this very, very important time as we see tensions rising in the Middle East and the prospect of a regional war becoming even more of a possibility than it was a few months ago?
Well, it's great to be here with you again. But for the last couple of years, really, we've been preparing for a war to come. I mean, you know, 2 years ago, you wouldn't have thought of an October the 7th type of incident, but there was a preparation going on, and you know, our Vision for Israel was very much involved in humanitarian aid, but also sharing with the nations the reality of what's really happening in the Middle East, and that's never stopped. But over the last few months, the increase of getting bomb shelters into, it started off mainly in the south, but then with the whole problem with Hezbollah getting greater and more relevant and closer to happening, we started to put in bomb shelters around the northern side and the northeastern side, and you know, the fairly recent attack that came in Golan Heights with the young people who were in the playground watching a football match, very young kids. We had just placed one of our bomb shelters within minutes of that place where the bomb landed, but there was no warning. So these children didn't have a warning, a siren or anything to get into the bomb shelters. But it made us realize, I was only talking to Barrett a couple of weeks back, and we were counting how many we'd reached now with the bomb shelters. And I think we've got to 320 that we've placed all around the country. But we're wanting to get up to 500 to 1,000 really, because the threat, like Robin's just mentioned from Hezbollah, is getting greater and greater. Syria's just as dangerous because it's all under the Iranian control. And despite Gaza seeming to be quieter, there is still the potential of that rising up again. And you know, again, as Robin mentioned, the world, the nations do not understand the battle. And even talking about those displaced people in the northern part, you know, you mentioned that. We are helping with those because, you know, they're not working anymore. They haven't got education for their children. So some, you know, we were talking about the bomb shelters. How could they be used beyond the war? Well, perhaps they're going to have to be opened up as classrooms to help with getting the children of Israel back into the studies and getting them up to date, because it's a little bit like COVID when it hit our nation. Suddenly kids were so behind in studies and so on. There's going to be major challenges ahead, but the major challenge we have at the moment is not only providing humanitarian aid and the truth into the nations, but getting as much bomb shelters as we can into the land to save lives.
Excellent, do great work. So thank you for giving us an update on that one. Robin, back onto the US presidential election. I mean, in terms of US presidential elections, this got to be the most dramatic that we've seen in decades. I mean, firstly, we had the disastrous presidential election debate with Joe Biden and Trump. And of course, lots of Joe Biden lost that debate and was kind of ridiculed throughout the American media. Even his own liberal media then kind of questioned his ability to be president. This was followed then by a failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump, which then gave him momentum in the polls. And then the big news that someone had forced Joe Biden to step down as the Democrats' presidential candidate. Now we have his vice president, Kamala Harris, now running for office and will be up against Donald Trump on Tuesday, the 5th of November, when the American people decide who will be the 47th president. So share with us your thoughts on what is a very dramatic US presidential election campaign.
Okay, I think we need to, if we can, try to see what has happened in the last week or so through the eyes of Israel's enemies, not our eyes, looking on as, Westerners, observing what's going on across the pond. And I think the overriding sense is that Israel's enemies see the United States as weak, as chaotic, confused, not able to sort itself out. When you've got a president who for months, if not years, has indicated some sort of mental incapacity, then, as you said, Simon, finds himself after that disastrous debate turned on by the liberal media, who literally up until the day before were all saying he's fine, he's wonderful, there's nothing wrong with him. Literally within 24 hours they started to turn on him. The big names in the party started to turn on him and pressurize him to go out. And he fought it, obviously, until it was clear that the knives were out. I mean, that's putting it, bluntly. That's not the way they would portray it, and that's not the way he portrayed it to the American people. He's doing something for the good of the people. Yeah, if you believe that, then you believe the moon's made out of
cheese.
Then there's the choice of his successor as in running in the position. Well, Kamala Harris, as of us making this program, looks like she's going to be running, but she has not yet been endorsed by the Democratic Party. And it took several key members of the Democratic Party to actually endorse her. They were days before they actually spoke up for her. And then we have Mr. Trump. And all the balagan surrounding what happened in Pennsylvania, which, if nothing else, indicates that there is something seriously wrong with the Secret Service in the United States. And of course, the head has lost her head, figuratively speaking. The head of the FBI said there wasn't a bullet, and then 2 days later, the FBI said there was a bullet. You think, what on earth is going on in the upper levels of the security services inside the most powerful nation on the planet? And then he chooses J.D. Vance, which on the outset looked reasonable, but now all sorts of things, the mud is beginning to fly on him too, but it looks like it may not have been the wisest choice overall. So you put and she hasn't declared yet, Kamala hasn't declared who her running mate would be for VP. We're expecting that in the next few days. As we record this, in the next few days. So again, I come back to where I started. You look at what this chaotic election cycle and you think, this nation has just lost the plot. And America's enemies, I think, are rubbing their hands with glee. And some of them will take advantage of this weakness or perceived weakness.
Absolutely, that's very good analysis. Thank you, Robin. And Alistair, when it comes to American politics, we know that Israel is a top political issue. And in previous decades, the Republican Party and also the Democrats would champion Israel's cause. But now we're seeing that this is not so much happening today, particularly with the Democrats. So share with us why this is the case and why essentially we're seeing that the Democrats are beginning to turn against Israel.
Well, it's a very big challenge for Israel because they have always been the nation. USA has been standing with Israel, the big brother watching over Israel, supplying Israel, and then suddenly in this recent times, they've been so much sort of being challenged as well. When you see the Democrats recently, they are really in some ways almost trying to bully Israel into submitting to their will and their plans. And yeah, we know that the previous President Trump, was very pro-Israel, and he moved the embassy to Jerusalem and did so many right things. But even he had a bit of a fallout after he was not re-elected with Netanyahu, which was a worrying situation. But that side seems to be back healed, and I think these elections are very, very important because if the Democrats do come in for another term of presidency, the rift between Israel and USA is likely to move further. But there's no one coming from the nations to stand with them. I mean, there was a time where our government was very pro standing with Israel, saying the right things, but that's certainly changed over the last couple of weeks since we've had the elections here in this country. So, I mean, I really believe that in so many ways, Israel has got to start looking to its God. We have, you know, they've trusted in their weaponry, and as Robin said earlier at the beginning, you know, suddenly the enemy's weaponry is almost as good as yours. You know, they may not have the defense capability as we have, or Israel has with the Iron Dome, but they have the attack force and the missiles and the rockets with financial.
They do, but they are no match for Israeli firepower. I mean, also the fact is that the Israelis have probably developed weapons that we don't even know. They haven't even tested on them. They are using AI in their new Makiva tanks, and probably in the future using guns that are kind of AI based as well, which means they know exactly where the target is because the computer can generate where their target is. So to say that they are beginning to be more sophisticated, but it's not until you're actually in battle do you actually realise how effective these weapons are.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what the point that you're making, Simon, but the problem is that already they're stretched, and Hezbollah, with its other proxies and allies, Iran, all the rest of it, have already shown that it's possible to overwhelm Israel's defense systems. And if Hezbollah, with this reservoir of 150 to 250,000 projectiles, I mean, there's you know, a way exaggerated figure of 1 million that nobody believes, but the 150 to 250,000 is believable by most of the folk from the IDF. If they start launching 3,000 to 4,000 of those every day, they can do that for days. The Iron Dome, no matter what Israel has, will be overwhelmed. It will not be able to cope with that. And I think, honestly, that's one of the reasons why there are those in the leadership of the IDF who are hesitant, who don't want to take on Hezbollah because they know what they're letting Israel in for if they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important that we see that the United States backs Israel with a threat posed by Hezbollah. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN News report saying how the Democrats are abandoning their traditional support of Israel.
When Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in the U.S. this week, no administration officials showed up to greet him. Vice President and soon-to-be presidential nominee Kamala Harris also chose a campaign event over attending Netanyahu's speech to Congress, something vice presidents typically do.
I'm not surprised that some of the more radical members of the Democratic Conference may boycott, but it's shameful when their top leadership is so willing to abandon a key ally.
This is due to a party in deep division over Israel. Even longtime supporters like Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer have backed away from the current Israeli government.
The Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th.
The shift has been growing for years. In 2001, just 18% of Democrats nationwide sympathized with the Palestinians. Now, that number up to 38%. And in today's war between Israel and Hamas, more than half of Democrats, 53%, believe Israel is committing genocide against Palestinian civilians. Former New York State Assemblyman Dov Hikind says his former party is now unrecognizable.
I was a Democrat as an elected official for 36 years, but and now I'm a Republican, and it's obvious why. Because the Democratic Party has abandoned Israel.
And on Wednesday, there will be dozens of empty Democrat seats when Netanyahu speaks as a protest against Israel's war effort. Some have said they'll disrupt his address.
They don't want to show up, don't show up. The show will go on, the applause will go on. Netanyahu will present the reality of what Israel is faced with.
While the Biden administration is taking criticism for not being more supportive of Israel, the loudest voices in this intra-party division are coming from far-left members.
There are a few anti-Israel voices that have emerged in this party, just as there are in the Republican Party. We're doing our best to combat those voices, to make sure that they don't build more support from other members, but also to defeat them.
Mark Mellman's group, Democratic Majority for Israel, helped already defeat one anti-Israel member of Congress, Jamal Bowman, who lost his New York primary. Now they're targeting congressional squad member Cori Bush in Missouri. Mellman says that while defeating anti-Israel members of Congress is important, there's a major PR battle to be won, especially among younger liberals.
There's no question that a lot of young people, particularly, have been taken in by this misinformation. Those young people are going to become a majority, and those older people are going to be gone. And the reality is we have to make sure that those younger people in the population at large are as supportive of Israel as their parents and grandparents were.
If that's the goal, then the polling suggests mainstream pro-Israel Democrats have their work cut out for them. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Excellent report put together by our friends there at CBN. Now, one of the big factors, I think, this is reflected in our own politics as well, isn't it, Robin, is the fact that the Democrats despise Benjamin Netanyahu. They despise this government in the same way that the new Labour government despised Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. But they're more comfortable with the president of Israel. They're more comfortable with the centre-left in Israel. So share with us how kind of ideology is playing a big part, but also how we're seeing a shift within the ideology and the makeup of the Democratic Party, and it's more being influenced by the progressive liberal left that is totally opposed to Israel, is having influence over the Biden administration.
Yeah, well, what we're seeing with the Biden administration is not new, okay? We go back to the beginning of the Obama administration. We go back and look at that administration's attempt to get Iran on side, through this nuclear agreement that was a joke and has proven to be so. And so the Biden administration has just been, some people call it the old Biden administration. It's Obama Mark III, the third term of the Obama administration. So what was set in motion in that time, and actually what was already beginning to happen even in the Clinton era, has now borne its awful fruit in the way that the Democratic-led United States has treated Israel and the Jewish people, but particularly Benjamin Netanyahu and his current coalition, over the space of Joe Biden's time in the White House. And as you indicated, Simon, yes, we're seeing the fruit of the way that this leftist woke ideology, with all the tentacles that go out from that, has infiltrated into the educational system in the United States. And therefore you've got a whole generation of new, younger leaders coming forward who have bought into this story, this narrative. And as the report just pointed out, they are the potential leadership in the decades to come. So it does not bode well for Israel's relationship with supposedly its greatest friend and its greatest ally in the Western world. But I would suspect that out of the three of us here, we've all come across those who are Bible-believing Christians who actually think it's time for Israel to cut its apron strings as far as its attachment to the United States, and that God may be in the process of actually forcing Israel into that position and forcing Israel to depend on him and him alone.
Yeah, well, we're going along with what you've just said there. It's actually the, as part of my degree course, I ended up doing a paper on is the formation of Israeli foreign policy. And what was very clear right from the start when David Ben-Gurion became Israel's first prime minister, that Israel needed a superpower for protection. So David Ben-Gurion aligned Israel then with the United States and not with the Soviet Union and Stalin. And this is why, for example, because of the socialist makeup of the new Jewish state, this is why Stalin thought that I will recognize Israel in the UN, because the Russians could have a new ally. But instead, Ben-Gurion decided that Israel's best protection would be to find that strength and support of the United States. But it didn't really materialize until Israel's incredible success in the Six-Day War in June '67. Prior to that, it was pretty non-existent. I have to bring in the kind of aspect of the Democrats. Now, I think when it comes to Joe Biden, we know that he's frail, he's old, he's not mentally with it, and I don't think he has been ever since he's been president, since back in 2021 when he was inaugurated as America's 46th president. But he has been, in a sense, a long supporter of Israel. He talks about how, as a senator, he met with Golda Meir, and that Golda Meir had a big impact on him. He met a lot of the founding fathers of Israel. Is seen as being a strong supporter of Israel in the Congress, and of course he was vice president under the Obama administration. But on a whole, we could say that the Democrats could be a lot worse if it wasn't for him and Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. So just share with us how, with the old guard coming to an end, it looks like now the radicals will have a complete free rein in taking over the Democratic Party, and also potentially the presidency come the Tuesday, the 5th of November.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you look back, as you've just mentioned, the history of Biden, he was a friend, personally, a friend of Israel, a supporter of Israel. He was part of the Democratic side that actually understood how important it was for USA to be standing with Israel, because Israel is the defender of the USA in the Middle East. You know, it takes the first brunt of every attack. And without a doubt, what's happened as he's got older, he's got frailer. He was the leader to win the election over Trump back in 4 years ago, coming up to 4 years ago. But he's become, as he's got older, obviously more manipulatable, if that's such a word, but manipulated by the sort of far leftist part of the Democratic Party. And now, I mean, my concern was seeing the way he was deteriorating, even from the very early days of his presidency, was would he make it to this stage, or would he be replaced halfway through and someone like Kamala Harris would come in at that stage? So it's kind of interesting the way they've played the game and left it to very late, really, to actually remove him from that place, because they realized Trump was going to just take him apart, basically, when it came to any debates or any television meetings together. And so now they've been forced into going down this leftist or liberal thinking. And without a doubt, any standing with Israel, which came onto a lot of scrutiny or hits during the Obama days, is now going to be even more of a problem in the days ahead. And we talked about them allying with USA because they needed a major world power to be their supporter. But the enemies, and Robin talked about this earlier, the enemies of Israel are seeing that the superpower that they were part of has become weak over the last 4 years. There's one thing we know about Trump: he would stand up to any nonsense. He would speak the word, and people feared that he might take action. I don't think they fear Biden.
I think it's the unpredictability of Trump. They were more concerned about.
But the other thing, the other point I want to make on this one is, now the enemies of Israel are, they're allying with the superpowers. They're allying with Russia and China, because everyone's looking at America as being weak. So they are really being backed by the superpowers. They are numerically far larger than Israel, and as we talked about earlier, they have got weaponry now, which is pretty good and works. And there was the recent attack that came to the drone attack that came through Tel Aviv, and then we've talked even just now about the one in Golan Heights, and people are asking, how did those two drones get through with no interception, no warnings? Because the one in Tel Aviv caught them off guard completely. There was no sirens, middle of the night, and it hits a target, but and not too many people were killed. And the same happened
right by the former US embassy as well.
Exactly, just
know the place very well in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And Robin, what do you make of the importance and significance of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making a speech to both houses of Congress, really, I think, to put Israel's situation on the line, because, and I think Netanyahu articulated it extremely well, that Israel is on the front line. First it's Israel, then it's the West. And if the West doesn't stand with Israel, then the West will lose this battle that we're in, and even recognising that we're in a battle is the actual, firstly, a problem. But share your thoughts on his speech in Congress.
Well, I mean, it's a significant thing. He's the fourth time that he's spoken to the American Congress. I think that means he's the leader of a westernized nation who's spoken more times to the American Congress so far in world history than anybody else. I mean, so that's a significant thing that we need to take note of. But Netanyahu, I mean, with 100 members or thereabouts, so that mainly Democrats, not even there, he was speaking primarily to those who are on his side. So you have to I think you have to shunt that off to one side. He was already in a place, and if you watch the speech, I mean, every 30 seconds they're on their feet applauding him. That's why the thing took nearly an hour to, to do, because there were so many interruptions of applause, which is fine. But he's presenting his case to the American people. That's who he's trying to reach. He's trying to get them to understand, because of the left-leaning media that pervades American society, that is telling an anti-Israel story in all shapes and sizes. He's taking the opportunity to present Israel's case and the reality of what Israel is facing to the American public. And that was what was most important about him taking that opportunity.
So let's have a look now at this excellent news report by CBN, where the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently addressed both houses of Congress.
From the outset, Netanyahu declared his view of what's at stake in the world today.
We meet today at a crossroads of history. Our world is in upheaval. In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends. This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization. It's a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life.
He said the bond between the United States and Israel is indispensable for the times.
For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together. Because when we stand together, something very simple happens. We win, they lose.
Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. marked his first overseas trip since October 7th, when Hamas terrorists slaughtered, raped, and murdered nearly 1,200 Israelis, including 39 Americans, and took nearly 250 hostages. In the gallery sat Noah Argamani, recently rescued by IDF Special Forces after 8 months in captivity.
On the morning of October 7th, the entire world saw Noah's look of desperation as she was violently abducted to Gaza on the back of a motorcycle.
Outside the capital, thousands of pro-Hamas protesters chanted "From the river to the sea" and called for an intifada. Some carried flags of the genocidal group ISIS. Others pulled down and burned American flags, while hoisting Palestinian flags in their place. Netanyahu had harsh words for the protesters.
When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots.
Absent from the speech was Vice President Kamala Harris and dozens of other Democrats. In the audience, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib held a war criminal sign.
I really thought that was shameful. I think it suggests the kind of tactics that we've seen from the heavily anti-Semitic, anti-Israel boycott, divestiture, and sanction group, the so-called BDS people, who were very prominent amongst the protesters today.
Netanyahu said the Jews' right to the land comes from the Bible.
They call Israel a colonialist state? Don't they know that the land of Israel is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prayed, where Isaiah and Jeremiah preached, and where David and Solomon ruled? For nearly 4,000 years, the land of Israel has been the homeland of the Jewish people. It's always been our home. It will always be our home.
Jeff Balaban of the ACLJ told CBN News it's this connection to the Bible that binds Jews and Christians together.
And we know that so many tens of millions of Christians stand with us and behind us. And I have to tell you, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. So for 2,000 years, we really didn't feel this. And now we do.
Netanyahu ended with a clarion call that a nuclear Iran threatens both the Jewish state and the United States.
When Israel acts to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons that could destroy Israel and threaten every American city, every city that you come from, we're not only protecting ourselves, we're protecting you. My friends, if you remember one thing from the speech, remember this: our enemies are your enemies. Our fight is your fight, and our victory will be your victory.
And good to see Benjamin Netanyahu back to his, at best, giving moral clarity to America's politicians in the heart of America's democracy, which is Congress. Alistair, firstly, we haven't seen Benjamin Netanyahu speak like this for a number of years. I think he's rediscovered a little bit more of his kind of moral clarity. He's come out fighting, but doesn't this really reflect the absolute dire and desperate security situation that Israel's in, that he needs to wake up the American public, but also wake up the Biden administration to realize that Israel is fighting for her life and could soon be, as we mentioned at the start of the program, going into a war against Hezbollah that she doesn't want to fight, but may be forced to?
Yeah, I mean, he's a great speaker. Netanyahu, when I knew he was going to be speaking to the Senate, I knew it was going to be a heart-wrenching, brilliant speech he would give, and of course, as we saw in that clip there, a lot of the Democrats just stayed away, doing other things, obviously, in the presidential election. But the major battle, he knows he needs the American people on his side. But when you see the protests that are going on in America and in our nation too, the battle that needs to be won is a battle with the media and getting into the hearts of the young people, because it's the young people who are protesting on the streets. And as we said it earlier, they are the future leaders of our nations and the Western nations. But they are really getting their information because they are media friendly. They understand. And that's the major battle that needs to be won by Netanyahu. And I'm sure he won the hearts of the Republicans that were there. It was sad to see the Democrats with the little banner saying, you know, whatever it was, war criminal, and arrest and all the rest. But yeah, the battle needs to be taken beyond this, into the media, into the things that are catching the hearts of the young people. It reminds me of back in the 70s and so on, when I was younger, in my days. Don't laugh at me. It was the anti-nuclear stuff that was going on, and you know, as hippies.
Sorry, I just had visions of you at university with your flares, playing a guitar and being a rock star.
You got me right. And yes, it was the same thing. It was the young hearts that you needed to reach, and as you get more mature, you begin to see things differently. But these young people are influential, and really, I know Netanyahu is leaning at getting the presidential people, the Senate on his side, but the media needs to be won over too, because we've gone so... And
the social media as well, that's influencing Generation Z and the millennial generation. I think it's really striking, isn't it, that excellent report there by CBN of Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress recently. And what I think was the most poignant thing about that was that Kamala Harris, the new the new Democratic presidential candidate, was not there, and that she didn't want to be seen clapping him. She didn't want to be seen meeting him in that environment, because she then feels that this could reflect badly on her own constituency, which is the far left, which is the progressive liberal wing and the Islamist wing of the Democratic Party, and she would fear that she would lose face and lose votes, so she decided deliberately not to attend. Share your thoughts on her absence, and maybe her absence speaks louder than Netanyahu's speech to Congress.
Oh, I don't think so, Simon. I mean, people have taken note of the fact that she did not attend, and it is a diplomatic, political slap on the face for her in the position that she already holds not to be there. So she is certainly giving her political enemies an extra piece of ammunition with which to attack her in the days ahead. I'm sure it will come up, if she ends up being endorsed as the presidential candidate, it will no doubt come up in some of the debates and some of the campaigning that goes on over the next few months. But in some senses, she's being true to herself.
Yeah.
She comes from a Marxist, communist background. Both her parents were in that political frame of mind, and they still are. She has a track record. If you look at her behavior when she was high in the legal system in California, she has a track record again of siding with the so-called victim and the underdog at the expense of those who actually are the real victims in crime situations. So she is just being true to herself. And she's letting us see, I think, in many respects, what a Democratic presidency will be like if she happens to win the votes on November the 5th. It will be more of the same. And actually what it will be, I think, is Obama Mark IV. It will just be a continuation of what we've experienced during the two Obama plus Biden and then on into hers if she does win.
I don't think we can add any more to that. The prospect of that is really quite frightening. And, Alistair, we see that Kamala Harris is the potential Democratic presidential candidate going into Tuesday, the 5th of November's election when the Americans go to the polls. But also, if we look at her track record, as Robin was saying, she is the most progressive, liberal politician in the Senate. And of course, she's going to take those views and those values into the White House. I mean, the fact that anyone that can put the center of her election campaign, the issue of abortion, at the center of her campaign, really does show her character and her values. So I don't think she would be a friend of Israel at all. Share your thoughts.
Definitely not. Very worrying that she is now the presidential candidate, or she's not been confirmed, but it's likely to be. There's no one else coming in. And she's shown her true colors. And as Robin just said, there's now, where the line is drawn. If you go this side of it, you're going to get Kamala Harris and the whole Democratic team behind what will be anti-Israel for sure, and pro-liberalism and wokeism and all the rest. She has shown herself as being very much pro-women's rights and not, pro-life for kids. So there's a lot. But it makes you think, how quickly has things shifted in the USA? Okay, I know we had the Obama reign back 10 years ago, whenever it was. And then we had Trump come in with very much conservative plans and very much conservative ideas, wanting to make America great again. His MAGA was his big strategy, if you like, if that's the right word. But in 2.5 years since he was replaced by Biden, they've moved so far against the things they've stood for so long, for decades, really. And it's a worrying thing. And the other interesting point is we had our elections on July the 4th here in this country, which is American Independence Day. They're having theirs on November the 5th, Guy Fawkes Day. I wonder if there's some significance in those dates.
I think that's for another program, I think, on that one.
Surely we are seeing an abuse of terms here. We talk about them being progressive, we talk about them being libertarian, but actually the United States has become one of the most oppressive places to live if you don't toe the political line of those who are in power.
Okay, but no.
That's another. It's just this. It is the terms have been turned on their heads.
But what would American politicians going back to the McCarthy era in the 1950s 50s be thinking now that we have a presidential candidate whose father was a university professor and a confessed Marxist? Yeah. She's a Marxist. Virtually the new core of the Democratic Party are under Marxist influence, and we're seeing this huge cultural Marxist influence within the Democratic Party. How would the likes of Richard Nixon kind of responded to that, where even a sniff of anyone being a communist would be
absolutely horrified.
Yeah. But I think that shows
how
you where
things have
America's
shifted.
gone. Absolutely. So on that one, and I think it's important to really detail and to really go through Kamala Harris's position on Israel. We know that she's been very critical of Israel's war in Gaza. She constantly speaks up on behalf of the people, the residents of Gaza. She completely talks about food scarcity and security. She's saying that Israel's overuse of force. So we know from her language of what she's saying that effectively she's saying the same kind of language as the Islamists in America and also those of the hard left. Now this is troubling for Israel, isn't it? Particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, if she wins the White House.
Of course it's troubling. And we're back to something that you mentioned, I think it was you mentioned earlier on, that Israel, bless their hearts, are absolutely deplorable when it comes to presenting their case and to the general public. They just have never, I think, been able to grasp the fact that they really have to try much harder to win hearts and minds. And therefore, when someone like her, who has this national voice, international voice, trots out these lies about famine, about, I mean, you have to think, okay, where is she getting this stuff from? Is there someone in the State Department is feeding this to her and she's just taking it on board without even thinking to check because some minion has trotted this out? And it is very disconcerting. And we face the same problem here in the UK. We've got a Foreign Commonwealth Office that is anti-Israel. We've now got David Lammy as our Foreign Secretary, and he's just trotting out the same garbage week after week after week that's been fed to him.
But I think it's coming from the globalists, and I think you can see...
but there's also the issue of people believing lies. And the more they believe lies, I think the less likelihood they can actually tell the difference between a lie and the truth, to the point where you could, tell them that, I don't know, the moon is pink, and some of them would just trot that out as well. And this is the state that we have gotten to in many westernized nations. Our leaders, those who are in influence over us, have taken on board deception and lies, and they've swallowed it to the point where they can't tell the difference any longer.
Absolutely. So on that point, it's very important to show this really interesting and profound news report by CBN that talks about how Donald Trump is preparing to be the first president in America's history, if he gets elected on Tuesday, the 5th of November, to reject the two-state solution and that of a Palestinian state.
Rabbi Tully Wise, thanks for joining us, founder of Israel 365. President Trump made news recently when he came out against the two-state solution. How significant is this?
Well, very significant. He would be the first American president to go against the conventional wisdom that has dominated the landscape for the last 30 years. It is it's very consistent with his other statements since the war began. President Trump has been very supportive of Israel, but what he said to Time magazine was very surprising. He said that he used to believe in the Palestinian state. He used to believe in a two-state solution, but he doesn't believe it anymore. And he's changed his mind in light of, frankly, the Palestinian community. The atrocity itself, the rampant support for the Hamas attacks from the population, not only in Gaza, but also throughout the Arab towns in Judea and Samaria.
And I also understand you wrote a letter, along with others, to Trump himself.
Right. We had formed a coalition called Keep God's Land, which is a coalition of faith leaders, Jewish and Christian, who are both opposed to the two-state solution, opposed to a Palestinian terror state, and in support of Israel maintaining its sovereignty and settling the entire greater Israel, of Israel, Judea and Samaria, and Gaza. And as soon as the Trump's remarks were publicized, so we drafted a letter to thank President's support for his moral clarity. We circulated it in the Jewish community. We circulated it in the Christian community outside, through the Keep God's Land Coalition. And in just an hour, we had 100 signatures. I think we're up to about 400 signatures of faith leaders who are in gratitude to President Trump for changing his mind and revoking his support for the Palestinian state.
Yeah. Yet the Biden administration actually seems to be pushing for a two-state solution. Why do you believe a two-state solution is not what Israel should be doing right now?
Yeah, the Biden administration on October 8th and 9th was already reaffirming their commitment to the two-state solution as the only solution. A lot of people think, well, there is no alternative to the two-state. It is the solution. It's not true. There are alternatives. Ambassador David Friedman, who is a big part of the leadership of the Keep God's Land Coalition, he has presented an alternative, a one Jewish state solution where Israel maintains sovereignty throughout Judea and Samaria. The two-state solution would reward terrorism, number one, and it would be a strategic and military nightmare for the state of Israel. The Palestinian state would be on our borders, on our neck, surrounding our airports, surrounding Jerusalem. But also from a biblical, spiritual point of view, this is not even our land. This doesn't belong to the Israeli people. The land of Israel belongs to God, and it's not ours to give it up. We must keep God's land.
Well, it's a point that a lot of people may not realize if they don't read the Bible. This land is also called the West Bank, but by most of the world, much of the media. And you had a declaration at the NRB in February. Tell us what that declaration was.
Well, Keep God's Lands came out with this new policy towards the media, and we worked very closely with the NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters, on encouraging Christian conservative media, also Jewish media, to refer to the territory by its rightful name, Judea and Samaria, and not by the inaccurate names of the occupied territories or the West Bank. So the NRB actually endorsed this resolution at their major conference of Christian communicators in Nashville, Tennessee in February. And the Keep God's Land Coalition has only been building momentum since that launch in February. We had a major event in Washington, D.C. recently where we had leading congressmen and women and senators also talking about their opposition, congressional opposition to a Palestinian terrorist state alongside, or what they would want instead of, Israel.
Okay. Well, Rabbi Tully Wise, thanks for joining us here on CBN News.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
What a different world we'd be living in if our political leaders actually read the Bible and believed it literally. I don't think we'd be in the mess that we're in today. Alistair, firstly, I mean, if this is true and, Donald Trump wins the presidency on Tuesday, the 5th of November, and decides that the United States, for the first time in its history, is never going to pursue or not pursue any more a Palestinian state and a two-state solution to the Israeli-Arab-Palestinian conflict, that's a game changer, isn't it? And also a game changer spiritually for the United States.
Of course it is. But the only thing you have to remember is that the presidential period of time they're in there is 4 years, so it, like we've seen has happened, changed from one to another. But, I loved what the rabbi just said in that interview. You know, the land belongs to God, and therefore, how can we decide to divide it? I mean, we've been dividing it for the last century or so anyway. But how can a two-state solution work when the charter of one of the states is to annihilate the Jewish people, to bring them, you know, the chants that go out from the river to the sea, you know, the land will be free. That means they want to get the Jews out. So how are you going to have a workable solution in a two-state solution when one enemy wants to kill the other? It just cannot work. So the more governments that actually come on board, and like Trump is supposedly saying at the moment, we will not even consider a two-state solution.
And do they want a Palestinian state run by Hamas? Because that's the reality that Israel faces.
That's it.
The other aspect that I want to bring into this one, we know that so many Christians are really supporting Trump and the Republicans. But I think we have to issue a little bit of warning on this one, in the fact that there is no longer Mike Pence as his vice president, who was a committed Christian who loved Israel. But also we're seeing this shift in the Republican Party more towards isolationism. And if they have sway over US foreign policy and the Trump administration, this is not good news for Israel either, is it?
No, it's not. And Trump is recognized as an isolationist. I mean, that's a label that's applied to him, and it's well applied. Even though he has been so helpful and positive towards Israel in his previous administration, he's still an isolationist. He doesn't like conflicts. He doesn't like wars. So how far he will be prepared to actually go in supporting Israel and the Jewish people if, and I think it's still a big if, he gets elected, we will have to wait and see. But one of the things that I think is really scary is that there are certain Christian leaders who would make the case that they put him into the White House the last time. That's how they word it. We put him there. And they're talking about we're going to do it again. Well, we will just wait and see.
I think it's God that puts people in power.
Exactly.
Anyway, Alistair and Robin, thank you so much for doing a great job on the Middle East report. It's great to see you both. And I want to thank you for watching this program at home. Yes, we need to really pray for the US presidential elections, and because so much is at stake, not only for Israel, but also for the future of America and for the free world. And it's important that we really do pray, because whoever wins the presidency on Tuesday, the 5th of November, will not only lead the United States, but also lead the free world. And we want a person of character and depth and moral integrity to be in that position. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.